The Salem, Indiana John Doe, identified as Albert Edwin Roadhs, who went by the name Pinky, also known as Bill Lee Hull. This one is a little strange. Bill Lee Hull passed away from natural causes in Salem, Indiana on May 24, 2012. There was nothing suspicious about Bill's life, but when his estate was being processed, there were some questions about his social security number, and this raised some red flags. He lived and was buried under the name Bill Lee Hull, but it turns out that wasn't his real name. But then there's the question of who he was, and the odd fact that he didn't have any fingerprints. He, at some point in his life, had gone to the extra effort of removing them somehow. He had a tattoo on his arm that read Pinky, and that was the only real clue they had to go on. It wasn't until genetic genealogy offered the option of identification that his shocking past was discovered. They now knew the reason why he hid it. Albert Edwin Roadhs had been arrested many times, dating all the way back to his childhood. The mugshot shown here is from 1948, when Albert was just 16. But for Bill, his life of crime was just starting. We know that he was wanted for being part of what's being described as a series of stick-ups in Denver, Colorado, between October and November of 1955. Because I don't want YouTube to suppress this video, I won't use the nickname by the newspapers, but it can be seen on the screen right now. It turns out that he had been the perpetrator of numerous petty crimes as well as felonies. This started out when the authorities in Denver were looking into some cold cases, and it was through that process they began suspecting that Bill Hull, who had been turned into a John Doe, was in fact the perpetrator. It was the tattoo that said Pinky that made them the most suspicious. And for this reason, they decided to pull the DNA and take a look, and it paid off. The crazy thing is, for those in Salem, Indiana, Bill Hull was really well liked. He was just a sweet old man. The only weird thing they found about him was that the fingerprints were burned off. Otherwise, Bill seemed to be living a pretty normal, law-abiding life. But of course, the fact that the fingerprints had been burned off was a huge clue that something wasn't right, and he was probably being looked for in some capacity from some other place. In March of 2023, the Colorado law enforcement officers sought out an organization named Moxie Forensics. And Moxie's been responsible for giving a number of John and Jane Does their name back lately. They eventually extracted his DNA from his femur, and it turned out the investigation was the fastest I'd ever heard of. It took literally 30 minutes on a public genealogy database to find the great niece of a man named Albert Roadhs. They believed their suspicions had been confirmed, but when they reached out to her, she didn't know who Albert Roadhs was. However, because they had suspected this was in fact Pinky Roadhs, his genetic tree pretty much confirmed their suspicion. Pinky was arrested and sentenced to 10 to 15 years at one point. He then got out, and shortly after his release, he was caught breaking into a warehouse along with 2 other people in Longview, Washington on June 4th, 1966. He once again found himself sentenced to 10 to 15 years in September of 1967. It appears that rather than go to jail, he decided to escape, and that he did. While he seemingly disappeared, he had reinvented himself as Bill Lee Hull, and he used that name for 45 years, which was actually about half of his life. Pinky was in a relationship with a woman named Bessie Fields. The two met in a bar in Tucson and stayed living there for 30 years together, although they never married. Unfortunately, Bessie passed away years ago, and they don't know if she knew Bill Hull wasn't really Bill Hull. Her children, who are still alive, have explained that they had no idea. For their part, they don't believe their mother ever knew. This crazy story seems to still be unraveling even, because so much is unknown. It does look that by the time he became Bill Hull, he put his life of crime behind him. We know, of course, that he met Bessie in Tucson, but he eventually later relocated to Salem, Indiana, after about 20 years of living in Arizona. Shortly before his death in December of 2011, when Pinky was 79, he moved into a garage apartment owned by one of Bessie's relatives. He had tried to sign up for Social Security benefits, but that's the problem with using a fake name. They did not believe his ID when it was produced, and and he was unable to provide any sort of documents like a birth certificate or his mother's maiden name. And while the Social Security Administration suspected fraud, it's not clear if he was ever investigated. This had to be a risky move. He must have been desperate at the time because I imagine the real Bill Hull was probably already drawing benefits. So Pinky was pretty lucky to have kind relatives of Bessie. It was their home he passed away from natural causes in July of 2012. The police are still hoping people will come forward with information on this case. They're concerned about other unsolved crimes. Pinky Roadhs had gone unidentified for 11 years. Pipeline Pete, identified as Jack Clawson. Oil was booming in the late 1970s and early 1980s in Wyoming, Montana, and North Dakota. This story itself begins on August 28, 1982, in Granger, Wyoming. It was here that a pipeline crew was out surveying a remote area. They would find a man, and upon examination, it was determined he'd passed due to exposure. They believed he was likely 25 to 35 and 5'5" to 5'7", or 165 to 170 centimeters. Because of his location when he was found, he was given the nickname Pipeline Pete. For those not familiar with his time in the area, the oil boom was pretty crazy. I was actually in grade school in this same area. We had moved from Montana to North Dakota, and my sister and I would just count oil wells all along the highway to occupy us. But there were oil wells visible from the highway all over the place. And where they were drilling, area hotels and motels were of course swamped with workers who were sometimes transient, going from site to site. It was pretty easy to pick up work, and many would come and go. So whether he was there for that reason or not, it's not known for sure, although it seems likely he wasn't. But likely the police at that time suspected that was what it was, and that the man could be from anywhere. And of course it would turn out he wasn't from that actual area. It would take genetic genealogy to finally identify Pipeline Pete as Jack Clawson. Jack had actually disappeared from Fremont, California the year before he was found, in 1981. There was no known reason for him to be in that area at all, so nobody had any idea to look for him there. He was 24 and was actually from Missouri, and he had traveled from Missouri to Fremont, California to visit relatives, and it was on this trip home that he would disappear. His family believed the plan was to return back to Missouri in order to go on a hunting trip with some friends. Those friends were expecting him, but he never showed up. So traveling from California back to Missouri, this is actually about 1,150 miles, or around 1,850 kilometers. If he was traveling with anyone, it's not been released. What always seems strange to me is that many of these times people were riding in a car, so where was it? And if he was alone, he likely did have a car with him. The police are needing more pieces of the puzzle in order to identify what happened. If anyone knows anything about this case, the contact number's on the screen right now. His family was actively looking for him the whole time. So the big mystery is why he was in Wyoming in the first place. Jack Clawson was missing for 42 years and was an unidentified John Doe for 40. Had he lived the life he deserved, he would be 64 years old today. Thank you everyone so much for watching and listening. If you aren't subscribed, please take a moment to do so, hitting the bell so you are notified of new videos. And thank you all for leaving comments and emojis to help with engagement. It all pushes the channel to get suggested to new people, and I appreciate that so much. Take care of yourselves and each other.